All right, Michael Lichter, you are on Driven to Ride. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's good to be here.
Yeah, a photographic legend of the motorcycle industry. It's great to have you here. Let's start from the beginning. What do most people know you for? I know I kind of spoiled it, but what's your claim to fame?
Uh, I don't like to say that I have a claim to fame, but uh, I'm known for my motorcycle photography. I'll just leave it at that. In a very small, strange world.
Okay. Well, how let's start from the very beginning then. How did you get even into motorcycling in the first place?
Like most people, I was had the opportunity to get on bikes as a child, but unlike many people that I know in the motorcycle world, I did not have a motorcycle. So there were opportunities to get on friends' bikes or mini bikes whenever there was a chance, whether it was a Trail 70 or something like that going through the woods, or a mini bike at the schoolyard. You jump on whenever you could. So it really wasn't until I was a lot older that, I was, let's see, it was 76. So I was 21 years old when a friend loaned me his knucklehead. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a 1947 knucklehead with a very long Springer front end on it, a big long chopper. And it was very light, and the very powerful considering how light it was. It was still, of course, a 74 inch, but plenty of
Mm-hmm.
power for that. And I just fell in love with it instantly. And looking back, it's kind of funny because I realized that I'd read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance like 2 months before. Of course,
Okay, yeah.
of course, I saw um, Easy Rider when it came out as a kid. A friend's mother snuck us in, and that was all good. But it wasn't until I got on that knucklehead that things really clicked. And a month later, I had a Honda 450. So that's really the roots of my riding.
Okay. So really when you threw a leg over that knucklehead, were you hooked from the start?
Absolutely. I just smile ear to ear. And then 1 year later, I had my own Harley. I went out through a friend. Actually, his brother hooked me up, and I got a 1971 Shovelhead used in
Mm-hmm.
1977. I got that from Frisco Choppers in San Francisco over the Halloween weekend.
Oh wow,
And
okay.
then, yeah, and then rode it back to Colorado.
Wow, so you jumped in with 2 feet. You went right on a big ride only a couple years or a year or two after.
Oh yeah, and that Shovelhead, I got lots of miles on it. I took it back to California. I took it up to Canada. Rode it back to New York. I kind of laugh now because it was 74 inches, but at 1200 cc, and I hear people apologizing about their 1200 Sportsters that, oh, it's just a little bike. You really wouldn't want to go long distances on it. I just don't get it. So
Yeah, it's not necessarily the displacement. I think it's more the willpower that you can take a smaller bike or a quote unquote smaller bike anywhere.
exactly, exactly.
Um, so I guess a couple of years after that, you took another big trip that probably changed the trajectory of your whole life. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I did ride that bike to lots of places, and I started photographing,
Mm-hmm.
from the saddle or wherever the bike took me. So it'd be photographing the bike or photographing places I went, photographing scenery on the way back from that first trip back from California. And then in 78, I tried to go to Sturgis. We were rebuilding the bike a little bit, and it wasn't ready in time. So I went a week late, and there wasn't a bike in town. I really went, seriously, is this really the mecca of motorcycling? And I was headed north, and I just kept going up to Canada and ended up in New York. A year later
Okay.
in 79, I did go to Sturgis, and I photographed that for myself. I was exhibiting my work at the time. I also started working for some magazines. I was more coming from the art side of photography. And then
Mm-hmm.
some friends saw my work and said, "Hey, could we use that for a story they're writing?" And did that a few times. And through Sturgis, which actually, no, it was in 79, I met some people and they said, "Why don't I send some photos in to Easy Riders?" And I did. I sent 10 black and white prints in. They printed some. And the funny thing is, I only sent those. I never sent any more. And they printed several of them, including a image that I'm quite known for. It's an image of a prosthetic leg leaning against the back tire of a panhead chopper, and a guy's asleep next to it in a moving blanket. And so people
Yeah.
have connected me with that photo. And that was in that first group that was published. And then I don't know if I ran into people or they called or whatever and said, whatever happened, how come I didn't send more pictures? And I said, well, clearly you didn't care for them if you only printed 3 out of 10. And they said, no, that's not how it works. It's like most people don't get any printed, and please send more. And then within the 12 months following that, I did start doing assignments for it and going to events and shooting for Easy Riders, which led to a 40-year plus career shooting for them.
Wow. That's impressive. And all just because you went to Sturgis.
Yeah, I never planned to be a commercial photographer. Funny thing though is that um, this was already a couple years later. I'd done a lot of stories. Um, I didn't get the Sturgis assignment until 81. That's when I went on assignment for them to Sturgis. And I think 82 started my Daytona. I've done more than 40 years of Sturgis and about the same of Daytona since then. But after by 82, they were asking me to shoot bikes, and they said, too bad I don't have a studio. And we worked out a deal. They said, if I had a studio, that they would take a certain number of bikes a year. And I did the math, and it paid for me to build a studio in the backyard. It was paid off in 2 years. And then
Not
it was
bad.
there. And then other people said, oh, you have a studio. Um, can you do this photography for us? And my general answer to everything is just say yes. Actually, that first assignment in the studio was to shoot flowers, funny enough. And
Oh, no way.
and it had to be in 4x5 film. And I'd never shot a 4x5. So I called an old instructor. I said, hey, do you still have that 4x5? And he said, yes. And do you have holders? And he said, yes. I said, can you teach me how to loan the whole thing to me and teach me how to load them? So I remember just practicing furiously in the dark, loading sheets of 4x5 film and how it worked. And, and everything went well. I shot that, and pretty much I would get one assignment after the other. And eventually it led to a career of shooting annual reports, advertising, you name it. I did a lot of travel for that. I had clients like in the 80s, my biggest client was Kraft Foods. And that kind of
Oh,
morphed
wow.
into other computer. Oh, sorry, I got to shut this sound off. That morphed into shooting for a lot of other commercial clients. It would change who the biggest client at any given time was. But in
Sure.
2008, after the basically the economic crash in the U.S., I just didn't pursue it as much. There's so many people fighting for that little piece of the pie. My biggest client at
Sure.
that time, which continued to about 2011, was Oracle Computers, and I had a huge digital system, large format. I mean, they had certain requirements. I used to go to Europe and I'd see photos of mine of a computer that would be 4 stories tall on the side of a building. But
Wow.
yeah, but then I let that go, and I let it. When I say I let it go, I shot for a few more years. But then the art director I worked for left, gave me the names of all the people to contact, and I just never did. At that point,
Yeah.
I kind of went back to the motorcycling that I'd been doing since the beginning, and I continued to focus on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, in the creative space, you've got your passion, I imagine. But you got to do other stuff that pays the bills too. So you kind of have to branch out and do a little bit of everything.
Well, it was a great career. There were times when I had it was me plus 2.5 other people, 2 full-time and a half-time person in the studio. And, that was my main assistant. Well, I've had assistants since 1987 full-time, but one assistant, Steve Temple, was with me for 11 years, which is very unusual in the photo world. And,
Okay.
but it was a real job with, a salary and medical and whatnot. That's how I treated it. And we ran it and it ran well. And I did that as well as the motorcycling on the weekends and all the big events. So it all worked. Got
Nice.
took care of my family and kids in college, and now I'm back to biking on its own.
Yeah, can't ask much more than that. So,
Yeah.
well, before we dive too much into the motorcycle thing, I want to ask you, how did you get into photography?
Now that goes back to when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in a similar kind of way, the way I said I jumped on a mini bike or a friend's Trail 70, when I was 5 years old, I remember an uncle took me into the darkroom to show me what it was like to process film. And we took a family picture and we went in the darkroom and processed the film and made a print. And of course, uh, to kids then and even now, to get in a darkroom and see a print come up in the chemistry was like magic. It was amazing.
It is.
And
It
now
is.
I continued taking pictures, of course, without a darkroom. But when I was 13, my dad loaned me a real camera, a camera that it was called a Pentacon. It was a Pentax mount, so you could actually have screw-on Pentax lenses. He got that
Oh, wow.
during World War II, came back with it. And he loaned that to me when I was 13. And within a year of that, I had a dark room in the basement, in the family laundry room, and was working till all hours of the night, printing my own, make my own prints and develop my film. I just loved it. I did that all through my teenage years. And my parents would come pounding on the door at 4 a.m, say, "It's a school night. Why aren't you in bed?" And I said, "Don't open the door. You're going to wreck everything. I'll go to bed soon."
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what it was like.
Yeah, that's cool. I was fortunate to have two photo classes in high school, and we had a dark room and everything. And you're 100% right. If you seeing the photo come through from the start to the stop bath and the chemical process, it really is like magic, and it's very very cool to see. Also, really easy to screw up, but very cool to see once you get it right.
Well, I loved it. And I considered myself a master darkroom printer. I really
Hmm.
became very good at it and loved it. And I still have my darkroom. I haven't been in it in quite a few years, but I keep threatening that at some point when I have a little time, I'll get back in there.
Nice, nice. So let's go back to the motorcycles. Obviously it's been a huge part of a 40-year career. What is it about biker culture, custom bikes, just motorcycles in general? What kind of grabbed your attention and didn't let go about motorcycles?
Well, there are a couple of parts to that question. And one is I see it as twofold. There's the
Hmm.
culture, and then there's the bikes. I'd say it was the culture that first drew me in because I loved. I'd hitchhiked basically around the world. I mean, I spent 2 months in India and Nepal in the 70s, and
Hmm.
across Afghanistan, Iran. I
Oh,
hitchhiked
wow.
across North Africa,
Wow.
and I love taking pictures of people and culture. And I just loved culture. I loved being immersed in it. And at the time in the 70s, I was photographing bikers after I got my motorcycle and also
Hmm.
rodeo cowboys. I loved going to rodeos and stock shows and doing that. Uh, and then just I was more in tune with the bikes. I hadn't had a bike and I didn't have a horse, and that was the focus. But I loved the culture and I loved being in places where people were so much themselves. They just were in the moment, living in the moment, having a great time, and that's what I like to photograph. Then when it came to the bikes, which was once easy, where I said, can I do bike features for them? And again, my answer is always yes. And I built a studio and started doing bike features. I've done, my guess is about 1,200 bike features in the studio. That's kind
Wow.
of a broad guess. I mean, I've probably done well over 1,500 features for Easy Riders and their sister publications over the years. But with the bikes, I saw that more as folk art. And my job in
Hmm.
that was to do a good job photographing and representing what these look like and make them look good, but to get across the art of the motorcycle in a sense. So uh, I consider my personal art more my photography when I go out and shoot out in the world. And when I shoot the bikes, I consider it different, more of a technical thing that I'm
Hmm.
trying to capture these bikes the best I can and capture somebody else's art. And I remember in the 70s having it out with some artists where, I defended custom bikes as art. This is way
Hmm.
before the Guggenheim show. And what I felt it was like the one of the purest forms of folk art. People
Sure.
do needlework or beading and things like that, all these kind of folk arts. Custom bikes take a crazy amount of hours. Not that beading and needlepoint don't, but it also requires a crazy amount of money. And
Hmm.
all you're going to get in the end is bragging rights. I mean, that's what they were going for. They go down to the bar, ride their bike after they finished it, and everybody is loving it, and that feels good. And that's what you get, is that's your reward.
Yeah.
So I did feel it was a very pure form of folk art, and that's what I've documented for over 40 years, and on the bike side of things.
Hmm.
So again, sorry to be long-winded about it, but there's two parts of that: the culture and
Yeah, for sure.
the custom bikes that really attract me to it.
Do you approach photographing motorcycles kind of the same way every time, or is every photo shoot as unique as the motorcycle itself?
So again, now we're focused on the bike part of it because that's typically in the studio. I do some location photography of bikes, and I love
Hmm.
doing them, combining that where I shoot the whole bike in the studio and maybe get some beauty shots out in the world. But in terms of
Hmm.
a full bike feature in the world, I really hate seeing green chrome because the bike is sitting on the grass, and I hate the distractions of the background or
Sure.
people looking at the background as the photo saying, "Isn't that gorgeous?" Of where that it's at, and you're not looking at the bike. So the studio really isolates it to being about the bike. Again, if I could
Hmm.
have a beauty shot in conjunction with it, that's even better. But so down to shooting the bikes in the studio, I would say, I certainly have a way that I do it that I have down, but I feel like I'm constantly trying new things, always trying.
Okay.
It's hard to imagine that you could have shot 1,200 bikes and you could still look for a new way to photograph them in the studio. But each bike is different, and
Yeah.
you try to find. It's almost like a sculptor talks about looking at a 1,000-pound block of rock or marble and saying they're going to release something from it and uh, get the find out the sculpture that's within it. In a sense, I look at a bike and say, what is the best way to shoot this? What are the best angles? What am I showing off the best? What are the details that are the most unique? Most artful perhaps, and then
Hmm.
do my best with it. So I'm yeah, and it's not only how I shoot, but it's also the technique, like how I'm gonna turn the bikes in the studio without wrecking the studio, or how I'm gonna what lenses or technical aspects, and I feel like that's always changing. I'm constantly looking for
Sure.
better ways to do things, even at this late part of the game.
Sure. Well, and to pay you a compliment here, one of the things I noticed about your, at least your motorcycle, photography in the studio is, the stark background where you have to focus on the motorcycle in a wider shot. But I noticed that you also take kind of those close up pictures of pieces of the motorcycle that really make you appreciate the parts that come together to form the whole thing. And that was something that really struck me with your photography.
Thank you. Yeah, no, there's details make it. It's a combination of the whole and all the parts that make that whole. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, well, you do a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
So let's get back to the people then part of things. You mentioned that you really just get to see in culture, you get to see people really being themselves. I imagine that's probably what you saw at Sturgis that for very first time.
Yeah. Well, especially back then in the film days, let's say in the 70s and 80s, especially, well, right through the 90s. But
Hmm.
uh, when I started, there weren't many cameras out there. Somebody would have a Instamatic maybe, or point and shoots were just starting to come around in the 70s.
Okay.
So you're starting to see that, but film wasn't cheap, and so people didn't shoot a lot. Uh, so even though it wasn't that common to have a Nikon camera, let's say, uh,
Hmm.
it didn't phase people. It didn't bother people. They didn't really pose for you. They just went about their business, which is kind of strange. You'd think that if you stood out that much with a camera like that, why wouldn't it be really noticed, and why wouldn't it change the situation? But it didn't seem to. That part of that could be my the way I put myself into those situations,
Hmm.
for one. But you compare that to now, where everybody has a camera. Everybody has a camera in their pocket. Everybody's doing selfies. Everybody's shooting everything. The world is so crazily documented every moment that nothing special anymore. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and yet when people are so camera conscious because of the camera in their pocket, you lift a camera and people start posing. So it's almost a
Hmm.
challenge to go back to get people to feel natural and not be so aware of you. Again, it's like
Hmm.
opposite what you'd think. Everybody is a camera. You think it wouldn't phase anybody, but it does. You pick up a camera and everybody is conscious of how they look, where is it going, how is it going to be used, things like that. Back then, people just
Yeah.
didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've seen that big change at Sturgis over the years?
You've seen that change in our culture over the years. And one interesting point about all this is that I say that I have this interest in culture, and because I was writing, it was natural for me to go for that and document what I saw. But
Hmm.
I do see subcultures, and in this case, whether it was rodeo cowboys there for a while or bikers, that subcultures represent the whole. They
Hmm.
represent our entire culture. They represent our country and its history. So, I've been documenting um, mostly Harleys, but Harley Davidson and biker culture now since the '70s, and in so many respects and regards, it's the history of our country. Those
Sure.
photographs from the '70s. I have photos that you could bleep this out. I guess it says like "fuck Iran," and that was a photograph from 1980. Okay,
Okay.
and you could look at that and say that this was it places things. So you see that T-shirt. So you look at a shot like that, and there's very few T-shirts that are worn, or certainly
Hmm.
that have logos on them or branded. There may be somebody with the farm implement supply place they work at and have a T-shirt, or there's just very few. And Harley wasn't protecting their trademarks. Anybody could have printed Harley Davidson. And here somebody makes that
Really?
shirt. And yeah, until 82, no rules, and before they started enforcing it. So
Hmm.
again, back to this T-shirt. It was the middle of the Iran hostage crisis. It was August
Yeah.
1980, and it wasn't until we had the election in November where
Hmm.
Reagan came in, replaced Carter, and then on inauguration day, January 20th, 1981, would have been when the hostages were released. So you look at a photo like
Right.
that and it says it sort of represents history. Yeah, what was going on? This is how people felt. They were like really pissed off, and they showed it in what they wore, what they talked about. You see?
Yeah.
So or photos from the '70s where I have one where it says cigarettes, 60 cents or something like that. Well, you're not going to see a pack of cigarettes for 60 seconds now. So things like signage, whether it's in a washboard or a billboard,
Hmm.
that suggests time and history and place and what kind of cars are in the background. What did the buildings look like? It all tells the history. And it came up for me back in 2009 on my first trip to Cuba,
Mm.
uh, where I really felt that I was photographing the Harlistas of Cuba, and I was going, wow, the history of these bikers is the history of Cuba, you know, right from when the communists took over and nothing was allowed in. And that's why you won't see anything newer than a panhead there, right?
Wow.
It's just frozen in time,
Yeah.
you see? So the plight of those people, that's the story of their country. So I think it's kind of cool.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. And it really makes you appreciate, photography from that standpoint where you are kind of, I mean, it's easy to brush off as just a snapshot of history, but the more you look at the photos from different eras, I think the more that's apparent and more important it really is. So,
Yeah. I,
um, so you mentioned going to Cuba, you mentioned hitchhiking kind of basically all across the world. I mean, where's the furthest that your photography or motorcycling career has, or both has taken you?
I can tell you where I haven't been. I haven't been to South America, which is really strange. You'd think
Really
that
interesting.
from
Yeah.
Colorado, I would have headed south. Um,
Yeah.
but pretty much covered the rest of the world, Australia, New
Wow.
Zealand, China, Tibet, Russia. I've been to Japan 8, 9 times. I'm going again in December for Moon Eyes. I go every year. Uh,
Wow.
I go to some years I've been to Italy 3 times. I had some collectors of my photography there, so I've had exhibitions there. Been invited to a lot of shows. So in January, I go to the Verona show. I'm a guest of the promoters there. Um,
Okay.
when COVID hit in 2020, I came back on March 6th from photographing. Um, yeah, in the middle of winter, I was in Siberia photographing ice racing. And that's
Wow.
where I came
Okay.
back from just as things were shutting down with COVID.
Wow. Yeah, that's got to be a whole nother level of ice racing up there.
Oh, it was the Russian approach on steroids. I mean, they had hovercraft. They had
Really?
there was a Bentley on tracks, a tracked Bentley,
Yeah.
and every sort of motorcycle imaginable. We had a blast. It was so much fun.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. Well, and I guess I don't need to ask like what the most remote place you've been to, because I mean it's probably hard to beat Siberia.
Yeah, that was pretty remote. I've been motorcycling in Nepal twice. That was a lot of fun doing the
Oh
Annapurna
wow,
Trek,
okay.
and that was on Royal Enfields. I did that in 2018 and again in 2019. It was kind of fun because it's the same area that I trekked in 1975. So like there was an area of Nepal where I spent about a month on foot going up and
Hmm.
down mountains, and it took a month to go through this trail. And
Wow.
we did it on a motorcycle in a couple of days.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, but
There
and
weren't
just
roads,
being
and
able
now
to
there are.
ride, yeah, ride motorcycles all over the world. What? So you've been all over the world. You photographed motorcycle all over the world, traveled pretty much all over the world. Is there a common thread you see in motorcyclists that kind of runs through every the gamut of your experiences?
You would think the answer would be yes, but I'm not so sure. And I say that only because there's a big distinction between motorcycling as transportation and motorcycling for
Hmm.
fun.
Sure.
And it seems like a natural historical progression. And I think it was probably can be seen the most obvious in England. So I
Sure.
photographed there a number of times, done the Isle of Man, and in the 80s, a couple of years, I went to England shooting. Uh, and I go to Ireland often, and not for motorcycles. My wife is from Ireland, so we have a lot of family
Oh,
there.
okay.
So I'm
Yeah.
very familiar. But I think the story of the cafe racers in particular. Now, another part of my career, which has not been mentioned, is that I curated exhibitions of art and motorcycles for 22 years, mostly in
Hmm.
one place in Sturgis, where a gallery, they built a 6,000 square foot gallery for me. And I had a themed exhibition every year that changed
Hmm.
drastically. It was like starting a new business once a year, come up with a new
Wow.
idea, theme, had a new logo, invited new people. And
Oh,
it was really
wow.
like
Yeah,
starting from
from
scratch every
scratch.
year. I
Yeah.
gave that up a year and a half ago. But
Hmm.
anyway, I mentioned that only because one of those exhibitions was devoted to cafe racers. It was called
Hmm.
Ton Up, and doing the ton refers to going 100 miles an hour on a bike, which, of course, on an interstate in America is nothing. But when you're on a 2-lane road covered with cow shit and there's rock walls on both sides, uh, and then a roundabout up ahead, going 100 miles an
Right.
hour is pretty fast.
Yeah.
So I bring this up again with the cafe race because that was the culture of in England where motorcycles were so popular and everybody rode because
Right.
you couldn't afford a car, right? I mean, the people rode motorcycles to get around. That was their transportation. The car was not even a possibility, at least for many
Hmm.
years. And then there was the artfulness where people started making cafe racers, and there was the racing side of it. So certainly there were other sides. But you compare that to years later, once I think it was the Mini that really changed things, the introduction of the Mini in the late 50s, and then basically the killing off of the British motorcycle industry. They had so many
Right.
different brands and marks there because they no longer needed it. It no longer was transportation, and it got back to just being fun. You see, do it for speed, do it
Hmm.
for fun, do it for the art of it. I see that distinction everywhere in the world, and in most of the world, it's still transportation, where you get a whole family and a goat on one motorcycle, and that motorcycle may only be 125 cc's. right?
Hmm.
So in that sense, it's
Yeah.
hard to say that, what does that have in common with a guy that buys a new Harley and takes it out on the weekends or once a year for a big event? You
Right. Yeah.
very
There's a stark difference there for sure.
There's a stark difference there. So, but if I separate that into two groups, I would say yes. There's a similarity between everybody that rides a bike for transportation and everybody that for transportation and utility, I should say, and everybody
Hmm.
that rides a bike for pastime and just fun.
Hmm.
So that there's similarities
Interesting. Yeah.
within those groups.
Yeah, and I bet you a lot of people don't think about it that way. That yeah, it might be fun to ride on the weekends or when it's a nice day out, but you know, it makes you appreciate the fact that you can do that so much more. I think when you realize that there are people in the world who only have a motorcycle as their entire family's transportation. Yeah, you don't think about that. I sure didn't.
In a way, it's almost too bad that it's not needed because I think that's hurt motorcycling. That
Sure.
we don't need it for utility or for transportation. Yeah, it's interesting. Now, Harley has what's called a tri-glide. It's a three-wheeler they came out with,
Sure.
and for the life of me, I just don't understand why they didn't come out with called the tri-glide cervicar or something where it has a true box on the back. Like
Mm,
there's very little room in a tri-glide for carrying stuff. And you'd think that huge vehicle would have at least as much room as a dresser, and I don't know that it does. It may be
really?
maybe it's the same, or maybe it's a little bit less. I don't think it's any more. So why shouldn't a thing like that have a big box on it that could be used for a photographer and you'd paint it up nicer? Why not for a delivery guy or for an ice cream man again and have the good humor
Yeah, for
guy go
sure.
around with his bells, or pizza delivery and the box is insulated or heated and you could do all sorts of things with it. And I think it wouldn't be as necessary as it once was, where it was required because of cost. It was great because it was cheap to do,
Sure.
or they couldn't afford a car or a truck. But now it has this luxury that you could just have the cool factor. I mean, couldn't you imagine a really cool paint job on there? Saying Audrey's Pizza, and they deliver it. And that's advertising for them when they go out rather than being in some guy with a little light on top. It would be so
Yeah.
cool. Or set up on a
Yeah. There's.
corner selling their ice cream in the summer, right? Why
Yeah.
can't they reintroduce some utility into it? That's for people on a higher pay scale than me, I guess.
Well,
But
that
I
makes
do,
two of us.
yeah, I do think that part of that. When I say it's sad that we don't need it anymore, that
Yeah.
made motorcycling popular. So now it's not needed as much, and now we're getting to an era of potential self-drive cars where younger people may not learn how to drive. There's already people that think, well, why do I need to learn how to drive? I'll take an Uber, and then pretty soon we'll have the self-drive cars. If I ever need one, I'll just get one of those or get one for the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to even own a car anymore. You just,
Exactly. So
get
I
one when
think it
it's
would be,
needed.
they talk about all this, trying to get younger people into motorcycling and get them on the little push bikes and things like that. Well, I think that would be another way to do it. Have utility vehicles that actually get used and promote motorcycling as well.
Yeah, yeah, really bring back the utility of it. And well, you talked about your motorcycles as art exhibit, and a couple of years ago, you actually had one that focused on younger folks, dare I say, millennials. Um, can you tell me about um, maybe that particular one and how maybe you saw the future of motorcycling a little bit through these custom makers, and just tell me about the motorcycles at art as art exhibit just in general.
Well, it started back in. I actually had a small exhibit at a place called the Apex Gallery. It's the School of Mines in Rapid City in 2000. And in 2001, I connected with the Journey Museum, a beautiful museum in Rapid City, and
Hmm.
basically signed on for a 5-year deal that I'd produce these shows for 5 years. And
Okay.
that got moved to Sturgis and eventually led to the Buffalo Chip building this 6,500 square foot gallery for me with
Hmm.
80 theater lights and a few 100 feet of running wall space with spotlights on it for the art. And then I had these exhibitions where I'd come up with a theme for the bikes and the art. Now, for that particular exhibit you mentioned, It was called Youngbloods, and I forget the
Mm,
subhead, which was quite important to have that name, but that one was called Youngbloods. And to be in it, you had to basically be a millennial. I had a cutoff, a start and an end time, and I forget the exact year that that ended. But basically, at the time, they were up to about 34 years old. And I think there was a
okay.
guy in there that was 20. Um,
Wow.
and it was multifaceted because for, I'd say at least since 2010, 2011, I became very conscious of the demographics of Sturgis and all
Hmm.
events and motorcycle in general aging, as I was too. I'm not going to deny that. So I worked for Easy Riders, and they would often say, well, no, we don't want you to shoot that. It's not our demographic. And I would say, your demographic is dying. you know, basically, you know, what magazines and events and the industry in general did was they chased the demographic. So they had
Sure.
people that liked their products, that liked their bikes, that liked their magazine, and they catered to them, and they spoon fed them what they wanted. And they gave up on perhaps what they were all about and what their true identities were in favor of just chasing this demographic for money.
Mm,
And uh, I could use Easy Riders as an example. That so with them in chasing the demographic, they gave what they were about was being wild and crazy. I mean, they did wonderful stuff in the 70s and 80s where they just did crazy stuff. You'd open up a magazine and you'd want to go like, oh, let me see. You'd really want to look through it to see what they did because it could be pretty crazy, right?
right.
And then they got less and less so as people aged and they got more conservative. So did the magazine. Rather
Hmm.
than staying with their identity and maybe evolving so that new people came in and younger people came in. But I saw that with events too. And I sort of took it upon myself to say, we need, if this is going to stay alive, we need to bring younger people in. And so I did start doing exhibitions. I did one with some Born Free builders in 2013, I think it was 2014,
Hmm.
and constantly always tried to bring younger people, bring women into it, and try to promote that. So that show in particular that you're referring to, I think it was 2017 or 18, the Millennial Show, as it's fondly been called, but
Right.
Youngbloods. Uh, what I felt was that it was that age group that brought the energy and vitality to what we do. That they're the ones coming up with new ideas and new ways of thinking and new ways of looking at things and new ways of building. And they're open to all this stuff. And so that's
Hmm.
why I focused on them to see what they're doing. Like with my exhibition in general, I would find a subject that I liked and try to hone in on it and say what's important about it and what makes this interesting, what makes it relevant, and go from there. And that's how that Millennial Show came about.
Gotcha. Yeah,
And
no,
so
I
true
saw,
for yeah, I'm sorry, the art on the walls was also from the same group of people,
okay.
and because we tend to, you show the same old artist, it starts looking old and stale. What's
Yeah.
really going on? What are younger people doing? So that's why I think that was cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Did it give you some hope for the industry and for the future of motorcycling that there are still some folks out there that are, doing their own thing or that they're being themselves or maybe even doing some wild stuff?
I there's no question on my part. I have a lot of hope for motorcycling and the motorcycle industry that uh, people come up to me, or I get emails all the time about my old photography and people saying, oh, I wish I was around when you were first doing this. Or, oh, you must, those stories are incredible. And, you must miss those old times. Right.
Hmm.
And really what I say, my response to all that is that what's going on now is the best it's ever been in my 45-year career. That
Really?
it's yeah, I think these are the most, people say, oh, it was so cool, they were so outrageous, the things they did in the 70s. I would say as a whole, our society has become extremely conservative and much more conservative than I enjoy. But there's still, I think, hope in the sense that I look at what's going on with motorcycling and particularly with younger people and the bikes they're building, the events that they put on, the stuff that
Mm,
they like to do. And I go, this is awesome. This is relevant. This is fun. This is energetic. It's where I want to be and what I want to be associated with and what I want to promote.
hmm. Yeah, well, that's good to hear. I mean, it's, being a younger ish person, I do see that there are a fair amount of people, my age and younger who are into motorcycles and that like to meet up and have events. And, um, it makes me excited for the future. So, talking about, over the decades, I guess, and let's talk about you a little bit in particular. What is your favorite trip that you've ever taken on a motorcycle?
Uh, yeah, I always say
I know
that
there's only a
asking
couple to
about
choose from.
favorites, yeah, talking about favorites. So it's kind of like about your kids. You don't want to point to one kid and say, "Oh, you have a favorite," right?
Right.
That you like different things about different people and different things about different events and different things about different places. So,
For sure.
uh, you know, I I don't know that I could think of a place that I wouldn't want to go back to.
Oh,
Okay,
wow.
that yeah. I mean, it's funny. People say to me, "Oh my God, you've gone to Sturgis for 42 years." I have over a year. I think it's like a year and a quarter of my life has been spent in Sturgis.
Wow.
When you figure, it's basically a week every year. In the early days, it was long weekends, really, then it became weeks,
Sure.
and then because of my exhibition and stuff, I would go for many years. I've been going 15 days a year. It takes a week of setup for
Hmm.
the show, and I photograph all the bikes in the studio. So, uh, yeah, it's a lot of time to spend there. But people say, "Well, how can you go back?" And I go, I'll go to the same road, but it will look different every time. The weather's different. I'm there at a different time of day. I'm looking a different way. I have a different lens on. There's different people going by. It's changed, right?
Yeah.
Because I know people that have been to Sturgis twice and they have no intention to go back. They say they've seen it and go, wow, I've gone 43 times. I've spent a year and a quarter there and I'm still seeing stuff I've never seen before and I love it,
Yeah.
right? So, I mean, certainly there's trips. I've done 5 cannonballs coast to coast now,
Oh,
but
wow.
those I'm sitting on the back of a bike and I sit backwards for every mile. So I have over when
Oh, wow.
with the 5 cannonballs and then riding around Europe, Japan, and all sorts of other places. I have over 25,000 miles backwards. So
Jeez.
it's a little different way of riding, but I love that also. So the
Yeah.
cannonballs have all been great. Just every mile on 2-lane roads and just with
Hmm.
all the cool people and cool bikes. I love those. Riding through Nepal was fantastic. I mean, a lot of the events I do, I'm not riding. So when I go to Japan, I've only been ridden on a bike once in Japan, where I was in control and riding, because
Hmm.
it's the middle of winter also. And after Moon
Oh,
Eyes, I
yeah.
spend a week going to shops. We run around. I have all my gear and lights, and days are early because it's winter time, so I have lights set up and visit 2 shops a day. Those are fantastic. I mean, I'm sorry to say, it's hard to. I Gone to Siberia. I mean, Cuba was fantastic. That was really great as a cultural and
Yeah.
motorcycling experience. But I can't really say there's a favorite. I just love it all. I mean, it's all so much fun, and there's so much to see and so much to learn. Every day you're learning, which is to me what life's all about.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, if you have so many that you can't pick a favorite or it's hard to decide, I think that's not a bad spot to be in, you know.
Well, hopefully there'll be many more. Like I said, I'll be well, I go to Galveston this week. I just got back from Born Free, Texas. I actually have to go back to Galveston next week for the Lone Star, and then Japan for Moon Eyes, and then Verona, Italy for the Motorbike Expo. It's
Yeah.
just, and not only I had people say, "What's ever?" I don't know. I'll see what happens. See what comes up, and uh, if I'm invited places or I just pick places I want to go. The events are so many great events right now. It's
Yeah.
just another level. Everything's at another level.
Well, speaking of kind of another level, you mentioned about riding a motorcycle backwards and have done 25,000 miles on it. How did you even discover that technique? I mean, I don't think is that a common photography technique for being on a motorcycle, or is that a Michael Lichter original?
The first time I did it, I don't know that I ever saw anybody do it before. Now, I know they photographed the Tour de France. They have
Mm.
special BMWs with these rotating back seats and sort of
Oh, cool.
like a running board that's in a big U so they could move their feet around. And mine is much more stealth. I just jump on a bike and sit backwards, But
Yeah.
uh, I did have for the first Cannonball, Carl Olson out of uh, North Dakota, South Dakota, South Dakota. Anyway, him and his son Matt, they took a 53 panhead and they actually made a little seat for the back. It didn't rotate or anything, but they had footrest for me, and it was like
Oh, wow.
super comfortable. But I did the
Yeah.
Cannonball on a 53 panhead. The other 4 times I did it was just on the back of a stock bike, sitting backwards on the back seat. All I need is a sissy bar so I don't fall off. And it could be just a 4-inch sissy bar. It doesn't need to be a big one, just to feel that safety there. So that, like I said, they did it in the Tour de France. And I've seen other people do it. There was one back in the Discovery Channel years in the early 2000s. Sometimes I'd hook up and shoot some of those events. And I remember I was doing Billy Lane against Dave Perowitz, which was riding from, we were in Pensacola, Florida, and went to Dallas. And that was, one of my backwards deals. Yeah. Actually, they had the bike. So they had a camera guy on the back of a bike. And they said, I'll be able to get on now and again, right? But I could be in the back of this truck. And I didn't have anybody riding me specifically that time. I don't think. I think they were hired by them. And but we went like 5 miles down the road, pulled into a rest area, and their camera guy got off and said that if I wanted to get on the back of the bike, it's mine the rest of the trip. They were going to shoot from the back of the truck, that there's no way they could ride backwards. They're going to get sick. And I just never thought about it. I jumped on and did it. But yeah, original or not, basically photographers will do anything for the shot, right? And you're always looking for another angle. Yeah, I had a little cartoon somebody gave me hanging up in the studio, and it was a little cartoon figure of a photographer. And they're on top of a mountain. It looked like on the top of Mount Everest, and there's mountain ranges all around, peaks. And the little bubble said, if only I had a step ladder. So, yeah, like you're always looking for that little different angle. So
a little, yeah. Well, I have to imagine your field of view is way better backwards from the back of them, because you do almost have 180 degrees rather than having somebody in front of you that, is kind of blocking half of your shot.
True 180. It's a great view. It's a great way to travel. I love it. And, I may miss out on some of the looking forward shots. I probably should get more of that. Sometimes I'm sideways and I turn a little beyond to get some of that. But again, I do have, like you said, a pretty wide angle of view, and it gives me a lot of options and control that I don't have. Now, I'll also shoot from the saddle. I got set up.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Yeah. I mean, I used to have the camera, I'd set it like that, but it's tough because your right hand's on the throttle, and that's also the finger you use the shutter. So It's like, how do you make that work? It's kind of tough. So, you'd lock. This is, of course, pre-cruise control. You just have a little spring lock on the throttle so that it locked in. Not the safest thing in the world, but you do that. But, you go with technology. So I actually have my first new bike ever. I have a brand new Harley Davidson that I bought.
Oh, cool.
In July and August. I have it really outfitted for photography. So it's a Lowrider ST, which is a beautiful bike. Brad Richards did a great job designing that for Harley, and the saddlebags kind of match and they look great, but they're these little clamshells that I can't put anything in. So Paul Weidman from Bare Knuckles Choppers out of St. Louis, he made a bracket for me, and I have SW Motec adventure bags in place of the original, so it looks kind of goofy and whatnot. But and then Harley set me up with a big kind of a, what you call it, just a big overnight bag that goes on your sissy bar or whatever. And
for sure,
have a backseat and a sissy bar. So actually it's set up now that when I get where I'm going, that comes off. My son and I typically travel together. So he could let his bike down and he could jump on mine. I could sit backwards and he could shoot me from my bike, sitting backwards. Going forwards, I have it set up where I have a little control at the throttle. I have a little cable release remote set up there. So I could hold the camera and do all that. So I feel pretty safe about it. You just go with the flow and technology and history and figure out where you fit in.
You do what you do to get the shot, like you said.
No, I always say I just put one foot in front of the other and see where it takes me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild, man. And you've had a heck of a career so far. So you were working for Easy Riders for a really long time. I know that you are not working for Easy Riders here at the moment, but are you working for anybody new? Doing any new projects, kind of like that?
I'm always looking, and I shouldn't say I'm looking because I don't actively look. Things happen.
Hmm.
Again, I'm the kind of person that I love checking email and I love answering the phone because I go, whoa, what's going to be on the other end? It could be an
Yeah.
amazing opportunity. And so I look forward to that. And in that light, actually, about 2.5 years ago, uh, the president of Dennis Kirk, a huge motorcycle parts distributor, actually even
Hmm.
in the snowmobile world as well, winter sports, but
Okay.
huge in motorcycling, and they're just great people. I know this guy for a number of years, and he calls. He says he wanted to do something with me, and he wasn't sure what. And over the course of a couple months, they kind of came up with the idea to have a blog, and they said, "What if we do a Lichter notes section on the blog?" And I do my features there, and they had no problem with taking features that I was doing for Easy Riders, and Easy Riders didn't have a problem with them going digital. So for me, it was a
Oh,
great
cool.
opportunity. It was really worked out
Yeah.
well, at least for about a year and a half, and so we did it. It was great. At the time, there was a couple of years that I wasn't working for Easy Riders because they changed owners and they were trying something so new. It was almost like a fashion magazine, and they only came out with two
Oh,
issues in 2 years. And
wow.
that company actually went bankrupt, and the license went back to the original owner. Then it went to
Mm.
somebody new, and they came out with something called Classic Easy Riders, or Easy Riders Classic. And they brought me back for that. And at that point, I went on with the understanding they weren't going to have nudity anymore, which I felt the ship had sailed and it wasn't needed, and why do it? And
Hmm.
also to have a little more respect for the readers by longer form stories, and assuming that people want to learn something and want to read something. So under
Hmm.
those terms, I went back with them. In 13 months, I produced 900 pages of photography, a little bit more than that,
Wow.
which is crazy. We actually have a list of all those pages, which is nuts. But after 13 months, we had some differences of opinion, and I
Hmm.
had to quit. I,
Gotcha.
uh, things weren't working out for me, and I just said I had to stop. There's a chance I may go back, but the Dennis Kirk thing, I continue with that, and so now they actually pay my expense to go to events. They're amazing people. They're such wonderful people to work for, and what's great about that is I don't mind pushing them and telling people buy your parts from them because they are great people. So that's
Hmm.
really nice, and they let me do whatever I want. I just send in, my features there will have like 80 photos on them. Bikes will have
Oh,
more
wow.
like 30, but events will be like 80 compared to 20 in a magazine. And Easy Riders used to have like 800 words. These will be 2,000 word features. And so it's really fun putting it all together, and it's been great. Other opportunities come. Promoters invite me. I've mentioned already Moon Eyes and the Verona show. I get other
Hmm.
promoters. Galveston, I'm involved with them. They invite me down. So depending on the show, if it sounds like it's fun and good, I I won't say I accept every offer, and there's too many to accept them all. But there's some great things out there that I look forward to doing. So looking forward to doing plenty
Yeah.
more.
Do you enjoy writing as much as you enjoy taking photographs, or is it just kind of come with the territory?
It comes with the territory. It's like writers are expected to take photos anymore, but basically they're writers, they're not photographers. And the reverse can
Mm.
also be true. So I'm a photographer expected to do some writing. I take it way too seriously. It takes me days to write a story. It's not worth it, but I don't want to do less. And so I put a lot into it. And so I can't say I enjoy the struggle of being up till 3 in the morning, struggling with words and putting sentences together, but I
Right.
do like the idea that I could tell a story in a fuller way, that it's pictures and words. And when I talk about Japan, I talk about the culture and the people and what makes them tick and what the shops are like, and not just like, oh, we partied, we had a beer, and it was great. Like what's really the story behind there? Not that everybody wants to know that. but it's there if people want. And I like that things can exist on multi-level. We're in a swipe left and swipe right world of social media where people are just, yes, yes, no, 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 like this.
Right.
And I am under the firm belief that people may eventually come back to saying, what's behind that? On my own website, where I post all the pictures from an event. So, Dennis Kirk may publish about 80 of them. I may
Mm-hmm.
have several hundred. After I cull, I get rid of anything I don't feel is a good photo. But when I put them on, there could be hundreds,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes days for me to edit. And for me, editing is more the culling and captioning, keywording, because
Okay.
I want to tell the story. So there'll be captions and keywords so that I don't keyword everybody because I don't know everybody, but there's a lot of people I know, and people will be amazed. They'll search their name and go, "Oh my God, I saw pictures of myself from Galveston and Daytona and Sturgis and LA," and they all come up because you could search it. And I think that going forward, that will have value. That people may get tired of social media not having things in context, not being able to find things, not having sorted logically. And we'll see. I could be totally wrong, and people may be perfectly content with swipe left and swipe right, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Well, it gets a little exhausting. And like you mentioned, context. I think most people appreciate things more once they get what the context is, so that if they can get a caption with a photo, or, a story that goes along with a series of photos, I feel like it makes you appreciate it more. So,
Yeah, and I've always said there's a story behind every photo. And
oh,
my
for sure.
first book, I have 11 coffee table style books.
Okay.
The first one is still one of my favorites. It was on Sturgis. It was published in 2004, I believe. We did
Mm-hmm.
10,000 copies. It was published by Motor Books. And when I say I have 11 books, it's published books by publishers. I haven't self-published because we don't have the room to store books. I don't want to get into the shipping process, and I'll let people that do that's their job do it, right?
Right.
But I would like to do another book like that first one, because in that it was kind of free form writing about the photos. Some were about a story that is happening in the photo. Some may
Mm-hmm.
be just more stream of consciousness, how I was feeling, or what the photo means to me, or
Yeah, for
what it
sure.
makes me think of and what it represents. I enjoy that quite a bit, and so I wouldn't mind doing another book like that 20 years later. With I have so many more photos to pick from now.
Yeah. You mentioned your website, and I mean, they're obviously you take amazing photos. But there are so many photos on your website. I spent probably an hour just looking through all the photos you have, and I want to make sure that uh, people know where to go. So tell me how someone can check out all your photos.
That's my last name, Lichter, with the word photo. So lichterphoto.com. And
Yeah.
there are many thousands of photos on there, and they're organized by pull down menus from the top under bikes or events. And the events are sorted by event or by year. And basically, when you go to any gallery, whether it's a bike or an event, um, it'll default into what I call top picks. So you're not looking at hundreds or thousands of photos. So you get the sense of an event. And I always say that that's what I would offer to editors of a magazine. This is what I deem the best photos that you want to make your story out of. Then there's other views, featured or view all. So somebody wanting to see, oh, I know Lichter took my photo. Where is it? You may have to go to view all and search in there. Uh,
Yeah.
but it's all there. It's a big website.
Yeah. I think anybody could spend hours just appreciating all the different photos, because, like you said, it's from different years and different events, and so there's so many different flavors and slices of life on there that you could just get lost in the best way possible. So
I like that idea, getting lost in the photos.
doesn't sound like you're stopping anytime soon either. So
My wife says, she'd love for me to retire, but I don't truly believe that. I don't know that she'd really want me around 24/7. So I think the breaks are probably not so bad for her. I'm not the easiest person in the world, but yeah, I mean, retire from what? It's, you could, one of my assistants said, I had an exhibition set up in Italy, and they had two parties set up, an opening reception, then another reception about 10 days later, and they wanted me to stay. And they actually paid tickets for me and my wife, and the hotels in Milan are so expensive. And everything was
Wow.
taken care of, but they wanted me to stick around. And they said, well, they could loan me a brand new Harley Ultra to go traveling around. I go, well, that sounds cool. And they didn't pay for, they gave me that, but I had to pay for the hotels and whatnot.
Sure.
And my
Sure.
assistant's thinking, yeah, yeah, how many prints can you sell? Is it worth going for 2 weeks? You're going to be out of the studio. You're going to miss a lot of work. I said, I could stick around and work in the studio every day, put some money in the
Hmm.
bank, and then eventually someday when I'm older and want to retire, hopefully there's enough money there that I can go to Italy, rent a bike, and travel around as a tourist, but it won't be anywhere near as much fun as being
Right.
wined and dined right now and being with people that want you there. And you know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
seriously, this is much
It's a
more fun.
no-brainer. Yeah, it's a
That's how I
no-brainer.
look at it. That's how I look
Um,
at it.
well, that kind of leads me to another question. When you first went to Sturgis, were you nervous about like getting into the motorcycle culture? Because obviously this is a different time. This is 1979. Motorcyclists weren't necessarily known as the most friendly, welcoming bunch, and that's not to say that that was true back in the day, but I think the general public's perception of motorcyclists was different then than they are now. Did you have any reservations about kind of jumping into that motorcycle culture, or not really?
I think what you're saying about the perception of motorcyclists back then, let's say the 70s,
Hmm.
I think was best summed up by Dave Mann in a painting he did. It was
Okay.
a family in a sedan, a convertible. In my recollection, it was
Hmm.
sort of a green, I forget, a very light green. And
Hmm.
the kids are in the back seat, and the car is going from right to left, and the view is like there's a guy on a bike, and maybe the vantage point is maybe the guy's partner that's to the left. So you see this guy on a bike, and then you see the
Hmm.
car and the people in the car, and you see the kids like going like this, like waving and wanting to interact with the bikers, and the biker
Yeah.
being real cool, and then the dad with his horrified look on the face, like oh my god, and locking the door,
Mortified.
locking all the doors,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
kind of the perception, that pulling up to a red light and you hear all the doors get locked, right? So you say, how did I feel going into it in Sturgis? Well, for one thing, when I finally made it to Sturgis, it was 79. Like I said, 78 didn't work out for me. But, by that point, I'd been riding for a few years, and I'd been going to swap meets and events and
Mhm.
smaller events. And I had, I wore, I think it was like a used bomber jacket was my leather jacket. And I had cowboy chaps that I had that some local person made that they, kind of custom make to your size. And I
Mm.
wore those with my cowboy boots, and I just rode everywhere and felt totally comfortable. It wasn't like, oh, they're bikers. I rode, and they rode,
Sure.
and we have that in common. And actually, I rode a lot with the people from around here, from Boulder, Colorado. I have a photo um, that's called "After the Storm" from it was 1980, and we were riding from the campground, which was, of course, City Park in Sturgis, which is wild and crazy. And a group
Hmm.
of us, mostly the Boulder people, some Idaho friends at camp next door, and we all
Hmm.
rode over to the drags in Belfouche to see Pete Hill racing his knucklehead dragster. And
Hmm.
yeah, it was just I didn't think of them and me. It was just like, hey, I rode, they rode, we were all together or camped out together, and that was that. So that was never an issue. I mean, I certainly had issues. I mean, I've gotten into situations that were probably not so great and not so safe. Um,
Sure.
it, but by the skin of my teeth, I've gotten out of them, and was lucky enough to maybe be with the right people at the right time. Right, I was at the wrong place at the wrong time, but with the right people at that wrong place at the wrong time, which seemed to serve me well. So, I've
Sure.
everything's always it's worked out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you want to talk about, or that you've done in your career that maybe I missed out on?
Uh, I'm at it 45 years, so that's a lot of stories and a lot of different things. So, uh, I think we sampled quite a bit. Yeah, it's been good. It's been a good ride. That, like with this new bike, I put 5,000 miles on in July and August, just going to some events and photographing them, and I feel like
Wow.
it's just a whole new chapter now. That my bikes up until now have never been so reliable and been able to carry all my stuff. So it's like, wow, this is really cool. A whole new dimension. So yeah, why not keep
Yeah.
going?
Cool. Well, Michael Lichter, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. It's been a great interview, and hope our paths cross again sometime.
Well, I hope so. Maybe you'll make it to Sturgis sometime. I can't invite you to my show there anymore, but there's other places, and hopefully we'll meet up, Mark. Thanks very much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you.